In this episode of the Encounter Report, two professionals successfully deduce that it is in fact Kyrie's fault. There's Axelrod, your humble narrator, who did a second-plus playthrough on an emulator, and Krayson, our marathon runner who played the game blind on the Nintendo DS. And without further ado, let's get our sandcastle blueprints ready. Battle types are up first, and the initial point of interest are the random encounter numbers. In general, I engaged in less encounters than Krayson for every dungeon that didn't have some sort of a barrier. While I did have some prior knowledge that likely helped me out, I was also less interested in completing objectives like the letter delivery in the Sky Jail or collecting every chest in the Botanical Gardens. As a whole, Krayson was very interested in exploring every corner dungeons had to offer, and I placed less emphasis on it. Our boss encounter totals are also pretty close, but our times are drastically off. In this case, the difference is purely my failed attempts on the Azure Sea, where I spent a combined 1 hour 20 minutes on the fight. Krayson typically found great success in his boss fights and even completed them faster than I did. The challenges he faced were usually when encounters would play itself, so to speak. Battle locations are going to fly by, as the majority of encounters were in dungeons, so not much diversity here. Combat types, on the other hand, provide more detail on the various issues faced from battle types. Here we can see the strange dynamic of my fight encounters, which end with the encounter being completed or won. Despite having 80 less encounters than Krayson, my times are higher. There's also the two fights labeled under issue. These were two Azure Sea encounters that ended prematurely, in that I reset the fight before it could end. And lastly, somehow Krayson doesn't have the highest number of encounters ran from, which I actually found very curious. In the past, Krayson would reach a point where he's felt he's done enough encounters and would start running away from them, but that didn't necessarily occur in Sands of Destruction. Krayson's first encounter ran from was 112, which was in the Sky Jail portion. From there, running was sporadic and eventually evolved into just running from battles where his characters wouldn't go first on the turn order. In fact, there were only 10 instances where Krayson ran from encounters 2 or more times in a row, and 75% of the encounters ran from were in the final 3 dungeons of the game. Moving on to subtypes, this was one of the more fascinating pieces of data for me to witness. Sands of Destruction has typical random encounters, in that their appearance seems entirely random and has transitions in and out of combat. What's curious here is that the advantage count for total encounters is extremely high for a game that does random encounters in that way. 41% of my encounters and 55% of Krayson's encounters had an advantage with no added influence like items, abilities, or other interactions, just naturally advantageous, whereas in other games, there's typically added steps to get this high of advantage encounters. Party composition is up next, and both Krayson and myself ended up with the same party of Kyrie, Taupi, and Rhea. We both coincidentally fortified Taupi's flurry attacks first, and he was locked in from that point forward, while Rhea felt less useful to Krayson, yet instrumental for myself. When customizing his characters, Krayson opted to build exclusively into attack and provided no points into accuracy. Surprisingly, this wasn't as devastating as I thought it would be, but he certainly came across his fair share of misses, some even being crucial factors to deaths. Additionally, the morale for his party was quite high, which meant his characters were getting less actions before their specials. On my end, I had built equally between accuracy and attack, with attack being favored. I rarely had misses due to that, and because my party's morale was always low, their damage output felt very high. Regrettably, neither Krayson nor myself could figure out the morale system, so many of its details elude us. We've also got the level progression graph for each of us. On the left, we have the levels, and on the bottom, many of the bosses in the game. Each boss takes up a rectangle in the graph, and within those rectangles, we have Kyrie's levels when that boss was defeated for Krayson and myself. Notably, Krayson takes the lead once Rajiv 2's boss fight occurs within the Sky Jail, which is the first location where we have a significant encounter number difference. While both of us engaged in side questing here, Krayson had opted to finish all the letters and package quests after some unsavory fights against Lupus Rex, while I simply gave up on them. From this point forward, Krayson would keep his lead in encounters and levels, where I only surpassed him in encounters to a great degree in the Tower of Light, which is before the Noctua Rex boss fight. Level-wise, this was the closing of the gap where I eventually overtake Krayson due to the encounters he was running from. The number of enemies per encounter is next, and strangely enough, Sands of Destruction heavily favored 3 enemy encounters. For both Crayson and myself, they took up more than 50% of all encounters and closed in on 20% of time streaming the game. The vast majority of boss fights were also only single enemy encounters, and also strangely enough, I was the only person to see a 5 enemy encounter. The final combined stats are here to close us out, and it's fairly notable that Sands of Destruction's encounters took 40% or more time in the playthrough. I also did a small experiment to see the average time between random encounters, and it was strangely at 38 seconds for each of us. For clarity, this data was only for random encounters and only counted them in succession of 2 or more. This also does not weed out any miscellaneous happenings, such as shopping, stepping away from the game, or menuing. And that's the Sands of Destruction encounter report. I hope you visit Crayson's channel and social media to praise him for all this wonderful data. With another report done, I imagine we will never look at falling papers the same.
It's probably my fault.
Thanks for watching, appreciate it, see you on the next video.